Hey friends, what's up? There's one thing that you've been asking about, and that is more projects. So today I'm going to actually give you 7 projects, that's right. And these are going to be 7 smaller self-contained projects which you can use to challenge yourself and improve at Svelte. But of course you can bring the framework of your choice if you want. So we're going to go through the most basic example from a counter to a temperature converter. So you can convert this temperature. So this is bi-directional. This is going to be great. Then we have a flight booker. So here we have some conditions that we have to meet. And some of these are really easy because we're dealing with the web, so we have these primitives that make it easy to build UIs, right? Then we have some timer here so we can see how we can use effects and etc. Then we're going to build a CRUD app, so here we have some famous people, right? So we can do whatever we want here. Circle drawer is really interesting. We can just draw this. We can even change the diameter. And this is the cool part. We can even have an undo and redo, right? And we're actually going to see it's not that tough. And lastly, what sounds most intimidating, we're going to build a spreadsheet app, but trust me, it's going to be surprisingly simple because of Svelte's reactivity, right? So here we have some items, banana, apples, right? And you're going to see this is going to reactively update if I change the amount, right? How beautiful is this, friends? And if you aren't aware, 7 GUIs is based on these 7 tasks, right, that evaluate GUIs, right? So here we have this counter, temperature converter, flight booker, timer, CRUD. So I wanted to be as faithful as possible. So I didn't want the UI to be fancy, right? I just recreated what they have here, right? And you can challenge yourself. I'm going to leave all the links in the description. And I encourage you, even if you get stuck and you end up watching me, when you're done, just delete the code and start over. Just develop your thinking process and practice, right? Because that's really the most beneficial part of this tutorial, because tutorials honestly suck. They kind of don't teach you anything. Alright, so I sincerely hope that you take advantage of this and challenge yourself a bit. But before we get started, here's a message from our sponsor. I'd like to thank this video sponsor, you, the viewer. You can support the channel through Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. Members get early access to videos, help shape the content, and a special Discord role. You can find all of the links in the description. Thank you for your support. Alright, so in this video I'm going to use the latest version of Svelte, which is Svelte 5. And by the time you're watching this video, I think it should be officially released, so you can actually just open their docs and get started. And if you want to learn more about Svelte 5, I'm going to include a playlist I made. Alright, so let's get started with our first challenge. Alright, so the first task is going to be creating a counter, which is just a text input and a button, which has to be read-only, as you can see. So always go through this and read it a bit, right? It's like reading docs, which you do, of course, right? And then we can just go here to a simple Svelte component. And then we're going to just create a script tag, and I'm going to use TypeScript, which is optional as always. Alright, so in Svelte 5, how do we declare a piece of state? And not only state, but reactive state, right? So we can say, for example, let count, then we can use this $sign state rune, and we can give it the initial value. And this is basically just a hint to the Svelte compiler that this should be converted to a signal. And now we can create the input and the button. So let me just use flex gap. What is this? Is this Tailwind? No, this is just a custom CSS utility I made. Alright, so we can just use this. And then let's just say input text, boom, we can actually remove all this. And now we can just simply bind this value. So of course, as always in Svelte, we don't have to do some tedious boilerplate setup. We can just say bind value, and we can bind it to count, boom. S for the button, let's just give it a label count. And now we can say on click, so you can see in Svelte 5, events are just regular arguments, which is really great. You can pass them, spread them like butter, do whatever you want. Delicious. Alright, so now we can pass a callback, and the same thing as before, which is the most magical feature about Svelte, in my opinion, is assignment for reactivity. So we can, for example, say count equals count plus 1. We can say count plus equals 1, which is the same thing, or we can just say count plus plus, which is the same thing, right? Boom, that's it. So we can actually save this. We can go back to our example here. Here we have this count. And now we can increment it, as that's basically it. The only thing we have to do, we have to make it disabled because it should be read only, right? And we should probably turn this type text into a number, even though it's not important. Alright, so we actually cleared our first challenge. And remember, small steps, and then we can get to the last challenge that way. Alright, so I hope that you paused the video and tried the first challenge yourself. But in this challenge, you're tasked with creating a temperature converter, and this looks relatively straightforward. You have 2 inputs, so they're bidirectional. When you change the value in one, it reflects in the other. And here are also some useful formulas for converting Celsius to Fahrenheit and vice versa. Alright, so you can pause the video and try it yourself, but I'm actually just going to go along. I'm going to create a script tag. We need 2 pieces of state, so I'm going to say C for Celsius. Let's just give it a 0. Let's copy over, and this is going to be Fahrenheit. Alright, so let's create a container, and then we can create an input. I'm going to give it number. They say text, but whatever. Rules are meant to be broken, right? Such a rebel. Alright, and now we can actually say bind value. So we can bind Celsius, and you can actually just say Celsius equals. Let's copy this over, and we can bind F. Now let's see how my spelling is today. Fahrenheit. Awesome, first try. And let's also include some basic styles. So input, type, number. I can just say max with 10 characters. Alright, that's it. Now we can go back here, and we can see here we have our beautiful UI, chef's kiss. Alright, so how do we make this bidirectional? You might have learned about the derived state in Svelte 5, so you can, for example, get an idea maybe that you can change this to derived. But there's actually one problem with this. So for example, this works beautifully if one value that's reactive changes, so we can update this value. But there's actually one downside of this, is that you really can't use the derived rule to bind the value. So as you can see here, you get this error message, cannot bind to the derived state. But what can you do in this case? You can of course always just use a regular value, so you can assign Celsius to this, and then you can use an event listener on input, and boom, you have your function or whatever else inside of here, and then you can do whatever you want. That's a perfectly valid approach, right? But in this case, I actually want to show you how awesome classes are in Svelte 5 and how you can take advantage of them and create a writable derived. And basically, we don't even need a class for this example. We can just create a regular object. So you can say, for example, const temperature or whatever, and then you can use the power of getters and setters in Svelte 5 to bind these values, right? But actually, I'm going to show you a class because it's a lot cleaner. Alright, so let me show you how awesome classes are. So I'm going to create a class temperature, and we can just move our state inside of here, which works the same inside of classes, right? How beautiful is that? Alright, let me just remove this. And of course, let me just revert this to state. Of course, you can also use the derived values in classes. And the beautiful thing is that Svelte under the hood is going to create a getter and setter for these values. So you don't have to do something like this yourself. You don't have to say get C and etc. This is already going to be created for you. But maybe you want more control over what happens when you receive the value and update the value. And this is where you can define your own custom getters and setters. So the first thing you have to do is make these things private. So we can use this hash sign, right? So it's sharp C, the evil twin of C sharp. And we have sharp F. And this isn't just for convenience to make them private, but also so their name doesn't collide when we make a getter and setter for them. So for example, what I mean by that is if we left this alone and created get C for this, we would actually run into a problem because it has the same name, right? But since we can make this private, we can expose it like this. Boom. And now what we have to return, we just have to say this, and of course it's sharp C. And now we're always going to get back this value of C. That's how simple this is. And this is where you get complete power. So for example, okay, you have get C, but what we're interested in is when we update C, we want to update the value of F. How can we do that? Well, we can use a setter. So you can just say set C, and you can say new value or whatever, but we're going to get the new value of C Celsius, right? So let's just name it C. Alright, so the first thing we have to do, we have to update this value. So you can actually say this sharp C equals the new value of C, right? And now we can update the value of Fahrenheit. So we can say this dot sharp F, and we can just use our formula. So the formula is going to be C times 9 divided by 5 plus 32. That's it. And now we can just copy this over and do the same thing for F. So we can say get F, set F, we're going to get the new value of F. We want to update F with the new value of F, and then we want to update Celsius. So you can see how simple it is to get this bidirectional thing going. Alright, so the formula for this is going to be F minus 32 times 5 divided by 9. Alright, let's save this, and now we have to instantiate this. And another great thing about this is that you can store this temperature in a normal JavaScript file, right? So for example, you can name it temperature.svelte.js or .ts, you can import it and it's going to work the same because reactivity in Svelte 5 is universal. So you don't need stores and etc. Alright, so the only thing left for us to do is to create this temperature. So you can say const temperature, of course you can name this whatever you want. Let's just say new temperature, boom. And now we can bind these values because we're using getters and setters, right? So now we can get here and let's just say temperature C. and temperature Fahrenheit. And this is how we can have bidirectional values and bind values when you can't use a derived rule. Alright, so let's save everything. Let's go back to our example. Now I'm going to try something. 100, this looks correct to me. And now we can go to Fahrenheit, and 100 Fahrenheit is 37 Celsius, which is the superior system, by the way. What? Who said that? Alright, so I hope you had fun doing this challenge. Alright, so in the next challenge, you're going to create a flight booker. And of course, this is just a GUI challenge, so there's no backend and etc. So this should be relatively straightforward. You just need to create an input with two values, which is one-way flight and return flight. So you can learn, for example, how to bind values using select in Svelte and etc. This is a really fun one. So as it says, this is a challenge about constraints. So for example, when you select one-way flight, the return flight has to be disabled because you can't select it, right? If you input an invalid date, then the book option should be invalid as well. And this is a hard one to get wrong because basically we have this built in the browser using the input date, right? So it's actually almost impossible to pick a wrong date. You can even pick 1111111111 and it's going to be a valid date, right? So it's actually something hard to screw up, but we also need to make sure that the start date is not higher than the return flight, right? Because that would be insane, right? So yeah, try this yourself, have fun. All right, let's get started. So we can go here to our component. Same as always, let's create a script tag. I'm going to create a cheeky type here. I'm going to say options, one way, and return. Alright, so what piece of state do we need to keep track of? Well, first we need to keep track of the selected item from the list. So we can say let selected. It's going to be state. We can pass options as a generic, so we get types. Boom, now we can select it one way. We also need to know the start date. And we need to know the return date. Alright, that's it. So now we can actually just create a simple form. We're just going to use JavaScript here, nothing special. So we can say on submit, handle submit, that's it. Let's also give this a class of grid gap. Alright, so let's quickly create this function. Handle submit, that's basically it. The only thing we have to do is prevent default, so we don't want to submit this form, we want to just use JavaScript. And then I'm going to be lazy, I'm going to use an alert, you can use a dialog or whatever. So let's actually use backticks, you have booked and now we can say selected flight on start date. Alright, going back to our form, now we can actually create a list. So we can just say select. Let's give it some options. So we're going to say option value is going to be one way. Let's say one way flight. And then we're going to have return. And let's say return flight. Cool, so now we can actually bind the value that we selected. We can just say bind value. And we can pick selected. Alright, so let's actually create the date pickers. So I'm going to go here. Let's start by creating a label. We don't need for since we're going to have everything inside. Let's actually create a span SR only, which is just a utility class I have. So this is just for screen readers. So we're going to say select the start date. Awesome, now we can create an input date. Let's bind the value of this to start date. And then we can also make it required. Alright, so we can actually do the same for the return date. Select the return date, but we're going to bind the value of the return date. Alright, so now we only have to add the ability to book the flight. We can go here, we can create a button. Let's give it a label book. And this is going to be of type submit. Alright, so let's save everything. And we can also inspect as changing state. We can, for example, use the inspect rune. We can put in the value that you want to log. You can, of course, pass in an object here. You can log selected, start date. Let's actually do that. Start date, return date. Awesome. Let's actually go here to our UI. You can see if you open it here, you get this init object, which is currently empty, right? So you can actually change this return flights. We're going to see these changes here. See one way. And we can also, of course, change the date. Let's actually select today's date. Something like this. And you're going to see it's going to update. So now you can do whatever you want with this information. Alright, so now we just need to complete the challenge and disable the inputs based on the parameters, right? So for example, the second input should be already disabled if return flight is not selected. And of course, we need to disable the book button if there is no start date selected. And then we also need to check if the return date is lower than the start date, because that doesn't make sense, right? So this is just really some simple logical conditions. So we can actually go here, for example, let's see, here's our return date. And then we can actually do something like this. We can say disabled, and then let's pass an expression. So this is disabled if selected isn't returned. Also, so now you can see by default, this is disabled, right? But if we select the return flight, now it should be enabled. Alright, so now let's work on the button. Alright, so we're going to say disabled if there is no start date for whatever reason, or selected return, and of course, we need to check if return date, my bad. And of course, we need to group these two things together, put them in parentheses. So we're going to check if there isn't a start date, or if selected is return and the return date is lower than the start date. And of course, it's going to give us an error here because by default, we don't have anything in the return date. So let's actually fix that, and we're also going to learn about browser APIs, how we can format dates and etc. And this is really going to be straightforward. So let's create a function getDate, and basically our goal is to get the same format as this date here, so we can set it as the default, right? So for example, if we go here, we can see it's year, dash, month, and then dash day, right? Basically that's the format that we want to create. Alright, so we can first create a date. We can say new date, and then you can say const d. We can say date to locale date string. And I'm going to pick English US, it doesn't matter. And then we're going to pick for the year, the formatting is going to be numeric. For the month, we want 2 digits. So 2 digit for the month and the day. Boom. Alright, but let me actually show you something. So when we take this, let me just take this to our console. Clear everything. Alright, so now I'm going to log the value. So we're going to see now we get these slashes. So this is great for two things, because now we can actually destructure these values and we can format them however we want in a string. So we can say, for example, the split. We can do it like this, and boom, now it's going to split this. We can destructure this value. We can return whatever format we want. Alright, so let me close this. Go back here. Alright, so I'm going to say split, and then we're going to split them like I said. Alright, so I'm going to save this, so this is going to format, but of course we need to return this. And again, we can just destructure these values that we just split. This is why this is so awesome. So we can say month, day, year. And now we can just return the string formatted however we want. So we can use backticks. Let's say year. Let me just copy it over. So dash as the format that we want. So year, month, day. Alright, so now we can actually use this simple function. Say getDate. Let's just invoke this. Let's save this. So now not only are we going to get today's date, right? Everything works as expected. So we can say return flight. So you can see now we can book this. So you have booked a return flight on current date, right? How beautiful is this, friend? And of course we can do something silly like select a lower date, and then let's actually, my bad, 17. And I'm going to select this. And now we're going to see we can't actually book this flight. We actually have to select a flight that we can book. And now we can add some finishing touches here. So for example, for the start date, we can actually select the minimum value. Let's make that value today's date, right? It just makes sense. So you can say min get date, and we can do actually the same thing for the return date. Put it right here. All right, let's save everything, and that's really not that bad, right? So now when we go here, we can see this works as expected. So we have a one-way flight, which we can book if you want, or we can say return flight. Now we get both of these options. But now if you make a whoopsie, so if you return earlier date, as you can see, you're even shielded from yourself because you can't really enter an invalid date. But let's actually say that you're going here. So now we're going to see booking is disabled because the start date is higher than the return one, right? And of course, as I told you, you can actually, it's hard to mess this up. You can actually just put 1, and even though this isn't a valid date, right? You can actually do whatever you want, right? But yeah, I hope you learned something, and see you in the next challenge. Here is where things get a bit more advanced, right? So we're going to have to create this timer, and it's actually not really hard. This is one of those challenges where it's actually harder to understand what they want from you than actually implementing it. So let me actually explain this to you. So you have this elapsed time, which is just a progress, right? And here's just the elapsed time expressed as seconds. And this is the most important part where we have to use reactivity for this. So this is the duration, and they don't even say what this duration is. It can be 10, 20 seconds, whatever. So basically, whenever you change this elapsed time is going to be updated. So if you pick, for example, 10 seconds or whatever, is going to start, and then it's going to get updated as this duration changes. So this is some timer in the background that gets cleared each time you update this duration, right? Otherwise you would have this timer stacking. Alright, so that's already a bunch of hints. And then you have this reset button, so you can reset the elapsed time, and again, it's just going to start from the beginning, right? So it goes from left to right. Alright, so good luck if you want to try it on your own. Alright, let's solve this together. So what pieces of state do we need to keep track of? We need to keep track of the elapsed time and the duration. So we're going to say elapsed state 0, and we're also going to copy this line, and we're going to say duration. That's basically it. Alright, so now let's take care of the markup. So I'm going to say CRUD gap. Let's create another container inside of here. Here I'm going to have a label. And inside of here, let's just create elapsed time. Alright, and now we can create this progress here. For the max value is going to be the duration, of course, and for the value itself is going to be elapsed. So let's output also the elapsed time in seconds. So I'm going to create a div here. I'm going to say elapsed, and then let's just put S for seconds. Alright, so here we're going to create the duration. So we can say label span duration. For this is going to be of input type range. We can bind the value of the duration. We can set the minimum value to 1 second, and let's just set max to 10. You can set this to whatever you want. Alright, so now let's also create our reset button. That's basically it. So now when we go here to our example, we can see it looks exactly the same as their example. Alright, so first you have to create this interval, right? And for this you can use set interval, of course, and you can use performance from the browser API, I think, if you want. But I'm actually just going to be lazy. I'm going to use set interval, which is going to trigger every 100 milliseconds. And for that we just need to create a function start. And let's just create here this interval so we can assign it and clear it. Alright, so we can reassign this interval to set interval. Let's pass it a callback, and let's also say that it should run every 100 milliseconds. Alright, so what we want to do, we just want to increment elapsed. So we can say plus equals .1 basically. And then we can check, hey, if elapsed is higher than the duration, then we can actually clear the interval and we're done. And let's also give it a type of number. And great, that's basically it. And we can also create a reset function since we're here. So we can just go function reset. We want to reset the elapsed to 0, and we want to start the timer again, right? Alright, so how do we actually rerun this timer when we change duration, right? Well, for this we can actually use an effect. So we can actually go here and we can say effect. Alright, and here we can actually do two great things at once. So for example, if we say if there is no duration, we just want to immediately return from this effect. And another thing that we're doing with this, because we're using this value inside of effect, it's always going to rerun when that value changes. And this is basically how simple effects in Svelte 5 are. There really is no dependency array that you have to think about. This is just reactive because you use this value inside of effect. And what we actually want to do, well, we actually want to start the interval. But there's actually another cool thing that we can do. So when duration changes, this is going to rerun, right? And what is this a perfect opportunity for? For a cleanup. Boom, look how easy this is. You can return a cleanup from the effect by returning a function. Clear interval, and we can actually just clear the interval. And that's basically it. And now we can even go here and let's just start the default duration. Let's put it to 5 just so it starts automatically. And now we're going to see it already works. You can see this is weird formatting. We can use toFixed. Very simple. So we can see where it is. Elapsed. Let's use toFixed 1. Boom, done. So you can already see it's going to go up to 5 seconds. Awesome. So now let's reset it. Oh, but of course we need to plug in the function, right? So here we can just go on click, reset. As you can see, this is just going to restart. And you're going to also notice one peculiar bug, that is, you can see how it's 5.1, and that's basically just because how this interval here works. So for example, it's going to increment this and it's going to go over the allowed number, the duration, and it's already too late at this point. So what can we actually do? We can actually just assign it to the final value. So we can say elapsed duration. So what we're going to see is going to go up to 5 seconds. And it's going to stop perfectly. Alright, so now you can actually reset it. You're going to see, now when we update it, it's going to update this elapsed timer. You're going to see it's going to be finished immediately if we go back in time, right? But we can actually see that we can actually finish it right now. So it's going to go up to 10 seconds. Alright, so this was a really fun challenge in my opinion. Alright, your next task is going to be to create a basic CRUD app. And if you don't know, CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update, Delete. In this example, you have a list of people. When you select one of the people from the list, you're going to populate these fields that are called name and surname. You can also take free actions. You can create, update, and delete someone from the list. There is also a basic search that filters the people by their surname. And this layout is also perfect for CSS Grid. Alright, you can pause the video and try it yourself if you want. Alright, let's solve this together. First, I'm going to create a script tag. I'm going to add a type person. They're going to have a name, which is a string, and of course a surname, which is going to be a string. Alright, so now let's create an array of people. I'm going to say state array. So let's add some grades here. So we can say name, Rich, and the surname is going to be Harris. So this is the creator of Svelte. Then we're going to add the creator of Solid. Let's say Ryan Carniato, and then the creator of Vue, Evan Yu. And then we can also add the state who we currently have selected. So you can say selected equals state is going to be empty, and then we can use this person type here. And then we can also create this type person, actually not type, this state, right? So we can actually pass in an object, and now we can say name or surname. Alright, so let's take care of the markup. So let's create a container, class surface2. Awesome. I'm going to create a search here at the top. Let's create a label group. Inside of the group, we're going to say filter prefix, and the input is going to be of type text. Alright, so we're actually going to implement the search later. So we can go here, and now we can create a label with a class people. And inside of here, we just want this for a screen reader. So we can say span SR only. And we can say names, and here is where we're going to create our select list. So we can again just create select, and we can bind the value to selected, and inside of here we actually want to loop over our list of people. So we can say each people as person. And then here where we have an option, we can say option, the value is going to be person, and then we can set the label here. So we can, for example, just say person surname, just like they have in their example, and person name. Alright, so let's actually just save this, and you're going to notice one thing. Alright, so now we have this drop down list, whatever, and you might be thinking, okay, let's just make this, what is it? Is it multi something, multiple, right? You might be thinking this is the solution, but nah, this isn't what you want, because now we can select multiple, which isn't what you want. But instead, you can just set the size. Alright, so now that we set the size to 5, you can actually see that you get what you actually want. So you can select multiple and etc. Alright, now we're going to create the details section. So this is going to be our other fields for the name and surname. So let's create a detail section. We're going to have another label group. Let's create a span name. Let's see, input text. Boom. And of course we can bind the value person name. That's why we created that. Awesome. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? And we just need to create another group for the surname. Create label. And we want to bind the surname. And now we only have to define our actions. Alright, so I'm going to go here and let's create a div that has a class actions and space X. Alright, so now we can create a button. So we have create, update, and delete. Awesome, you're going to see right now it looks like shit, but we're going to fix that in a second. Alright, so let's go here. So we can style this thing using CSS grid just so it looks like their example. Alright, now we can target the container. Let's set the width to 500 pixels. We're going to use grid. And so we don't have to assign the numbers of rows and calls. We can actually use grid template areas, which is really fun. So we can say grid template areas. And now we can actually just go here and we can define our areas. So we're going to actually have two columns. So I'm going to say search and then I'm going to use dot because this is empty. And then in the second one, we're going to have people and the details. So on the left, we're going to have a list of people and on the right, we're going to have name, surname, right? And then for the last one, we're going to have our actions. So we're just going to fill everything. So we repeat actions, actions. And let's specify grid template columns. So 240 pixels and one fractional unit. And we're going to say grid auto rows auto. So this is going to keep the height of the row in check. And then you can specify a gap. And this is 1 rem, but I should probably use values from open props. So I think 3 is 1 rem. Yeah, you can just do that. And then let's say padding. And if you didn't know, CSS now supports native nesting. So we can just nest our search here. And now we can assign a grid area to the search. This is why it's so much easier than having to specify the columns and the rows where this is supposed to go yourself. So you can just say, okay, your search, done. And we can also say group, display grid. So this is our name and surname fields, grid template columns, 2 fractional units and 1 fraction, boom. Align items, baseline. Alright, so now if we save, you're going to see it's already starting to look like something, but of course we're not done yet. We can just go here and continue. So now we can say, hey, people, grid area, it should be people. And we can do the same for details. Let's go, details, grid area, details. Let's see, if you save this, you're going to see now things look right. But of course we're not done yet. We can of course say actions, grid area, actions. And now everything almost falls in place. There is some more styles to details that we need to add. So we can say display grid, grid template columns, let's say auto 1FR, because we actually just want this to take the automatic space on the left and then whatever can be taken by the input. And then we can say grid template rows. So we're going to actually repeat, maybe there's a better solution for this, but actually it just works fine. So we're just going to repeat these 2 rows and then we're going to add an additional row. And then you can also align items on the baseline. And let's add a gap for good measure. Let's see our size, which one do I like? 0.5 rem, awesome. And then let's also style the group label. We're going to say display contents, and let me actually show you why this is awesome. Basically, display content is going to ignore the wrapper around the element, right? So it's going to pretend like it's not in the document flow. Otherwise, let me just show you. If we remove this, you're going to actually see our grid and etc. isn't going to work, and then you have to use subgrid here or whatever. But actually, you don't have to do this. You can just say display contents, pretend like the wrapper around the elements doesn't exist, so our grid can kick in. Alright, so now when I save this, you're going to see everything looks perfect. Okay, let's take care of the actions logic. So back in our code, let's go to the buttons at the top. So this is create, update, and delete. Let's go here. We're going to add an on-click event listener. On-click. And now we can name this create person, update person, and delete person. Awesome. Let's also copy this value so we can create the functions. And let's go back to our script tag. So let's just say function. Oh, actually, let me just see. Copy them in. Okay, say function. And that's it. And this is real simple. So we already bound the values of name and surname. So we can just go here and we can say people push person. So let's add the creator of React, Jordan Walk, I think. So you can actually create, and you're going to see is going to update. But now we also want to clear these fields. So we can say person, and then we can clear the name and surname. And let's also create a function. So you can say function clear fields. Yoink. And let's just say clear fields. And updating the person is also straightforward. So we can go here and first we want to get the index. And this is very simple. So you can just say index. We already have the selected person, which is just an object. So we just need to find out its index. And then we can say people index of, and then we can say selected. And it's going to complain because it might be undefined, or we can just say shut up TypeScript. Cool. And now people at that index, we can update the value. So we can, for example, say name, person name, and we can also say surname, person surname. But you're going to notice one thing if I save. So for example, if I select any of these, well, this isn't even populated, right? So how can we actually do this? This is just a simple use case for an effect like this. So we can just go here and let's just use an effect, pass a callback, and now we can update person. So whenever what? Whenever the selected name surname changes, right? So you can actually say name, you can say selected name, you can also check if it exists, otherwise it's going to be blank, right? And let's also do the same for surname. Alright, so now if I save this, we're going to actually see now when we select someone, their information is going to get populated. So for example, we can change Rich to Richie. How awesome is that? Alright, deleting a person also isn't that hard. So we can just go here, delete person, and we can reassign the people to the result of the filter. We can say filter, we can say P for person, and then we can say P.name isn't equal to the current person.name, or P surname isn't equal to the current person.surname. And once this is done, we're going to clear the fields. Awesome, let's see if this works. Alright, there we go, it works. Okay, so the last thing you have to do is implement a basic search that filters the list of people based on their surname. So we can actually go here and first we have to track what the user typed in as a search query. So we can say prefix, let's keep track of this. And then we're going to create a derived value where we're going to filter the list of people. So we're going to say const filtered people equal derived. And by default, we can only pass a simple expression in derived, but if you want to do something more complicated and pass a callback, you can say derived by, and you can pass a callback like this. So for example, here is what we're going to do. We're going to check if a prefix exists, then people filter, we can say P, and then we can say, hey, P surname to lowercase, and then we just need to check if it starts with what we're looking for, right? That's basically it. Does it start with the prefix? Otherwise, if a prefix doesn't exist, then just show the list of the people. And that's basically it. Now we can save this and you're done. And again, we don't need .by here because it's just a single line. So we can actually just remove this. That's basically it. Now we can save this. And the only thing we have to do is use the prefix and use filter people. And where do we use this? Well, of course, here we go to our search. So input type text. Let's bind the value to the prefix. And where we're looping over the list of people, instead of people, we're going to use the derived value, filtered people. Awesome, let's save everything. So now where we go here, you can, for example, search for Harris, is going to give us Rich Harris. We can search for Carniato, is going to give us Ryan. And of course, we can search for you, and it's going to give us Evan Yu. And that's basically it for the CRUD app. Alright, for the next task, we're going to make a circle drawer. So we're going to have this canvas here where you can draw circles. When you click on a circle, it's going to be selected, so it's going to have a fill color. If you right click on a circle, it's going to open this context menu, so you're going to be able to change or adjust the diameter of the circle. And then lastly, you're going to have an undo and redo history. Alright, so if you want to try this one yourself, keep in mind you don't actually have to use the canvas element itself, because then you have to implement some math to know what thing you clicked on, unless you want the challenge, of course. But you can just use an SVG canvas, so that's going to be a lot easier. And if you want a tip on how to implement history, just think of it as a slide where you can go backwards and forwards. So maybe that helps. Alright, let's implement the circle drawer together. First I'm going to create a script tag, then I'm going to create a circle type. I'm going to give it an ID number, or actually it's going to be a string since we're going to use crypto from window. So then I'm going to say cx number, cy is going to be a number, and the radius is going to be a number. And then we're also going to have some state. I'm going to name it status. So the two possible states our app can be is in drawing or editing. Awesome. And then for right now, we just need two pieces of state, I think. So first we need to define the status. Let's just say state. Let's pass status. And then we can select drawing. And then let's store the circles. So we're going to say circle. So this is an array of circles. That's basically it. And let's assign it an empty array. All right, so let's take care of the markup. So first I'm going to create a container space y. And then I'm going to create the actions and I'm going to have it say flex center. All right, so let's create our button. So we're going to have an undo and redo. We can just leave this for now. All right, so let's create the SVG next. So first we're going to give it a view box. So this is basically the camera of the SVG. Is going to be 600 by 400. And then inside of it, we're going to just loop over the circles and render them. So each circle is a circle. And then we just need to draw the circle. So we can use the circle element. And then we can just spread all of the attributes of the circle. So that's how easy peasy lemon squeezy that is. Let's just also give it a white stroke and a stroke width of 2. Alright, so that's it for now. Let's just add some simple styles and then we can work on selecting the circle. So I'm going to open some styles. And then for the SVG, we also have to define a width and height. So it was 600 by 400. And then I'm going to give it a border just so it's noticeable. Well, let me use gray 0 from open props. Beautiful. And then I'm going to have just some styles for the dialog that we're going to open. So I'm going to say, hey, width 400 pixels. I'm going to be lazy. I'm just going to say absolute positioning and I'm going to center it. So it's very simple. First, you have to say 500 for the top. For the left is going to be 50%. Did I say 500? I don't remember. I probably spoke. So you can just say translate and then you can just say minus 50% and minus 50%. So this is the X and this is the Y. Awesome. And then let's say padding. So let's say size 3. Awesome. That's 1 rem. And then let's align the text center. Awesome. Beautiful. So I think that's it. Okay, so let's draw the circle. So for example, we can actually draw a circle in the center like this. Save it, and there it is. So we actually don't want to do this, of course. Let me just create a function, draw circle. And let's also assign it to the SVG. So we can say on click, we'll draw a circle. And we're going to get some accessibility warnings, so we can actually disable them. If you just scroll to the bottom, you can actually automatically fix it. So yeah, we can just actually do this for the last one. There's 2 of them. All right, so now they're gone. All right, so let's draw the circle. So we actually have to know the mouse position. So this accepts an event, which is going to be a mouse event. All right, so we can actually construct a circle. So we're going to say that CX is equal E client X. So this is the mouse position X. And we can see that CY is E client Y. And let's also give it a radius before I forget. And we can also push now the circle. So we can just say circles, push circle. Oh, and of course, thanks to TypeScript, it's saying, hey, you're missing an ID. So let's do that. All right, so this is really simple. You don't need any fancy extra package or whatever. You can just say crypto. So this comes from window, crypto, random UUID. Boom. And this is going to give you a random UUID, just like that. Boom, baked into the browser. All right, cool. Let's actually try this. Oh, what is this? Oh my God. Well, the problem is that it's adding the width and height outside of our SVG, right? So we actually need to do some basic math just so we can say, okay, this X here, where it's the left side, just remove this from the calculation. Then we have to say, okay, this Y here, remove this from the calculation. That's basically what we have to do. And we can do that using get bounding client rect. So this is how we can do this. So first, let's get a reference to the SVG element. So I'm going to say SVG element is eTarget as SVG element. And then we can get left and right from SVG element, get bounding client rect. That's basically it. Yeah, so now for example, if I log these 2 values, save this, open the developer tools, let me draw a circle. Now we're going to see that the left is 72 pixels and the right, well, I didn't want the right, my bad, I want the top. Cool, we just clear this, and again, made a oopsie. Let's go. Okay, so now we can just log this. We can see this makes sense. 72 pixels from the left and 140 pixels from the top. Okay, so now we just need to take this into consideration. We can just say x minus left and minus top. Cool. And that perfectly works, so it draws the circle at the center of our cursor. And we can also snap the values of the coordinates so they're cleaner. So we can actually first convert this to a number because I'm going to use 2 fixed. So here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap this in parentheses and I'm going to say 2 fixed, just like that. You don't need to do anything extra. Let me just do it for this. Alright, so we're not going to get long decimal numbers when you're going to adjust the diameter, right? That's the only reason I'm doing this. Alright, save, and everything works the same as before. Alright, so next let's work on selecting the circle. Alright, so to draw the circle, we're going to need to add a new piece of state. Let's name this selected. This is going to be state, which is going to hold a single circle. Let's also give it an exclamation mark so TypeScript doesn't complain. And then here we can add an on-click event listener to the circle. This is why using an SVG is so much simpler. We can say on-click, we get the event, let's create the body, and now we can just say selected circle. But you're going to actually notice one thing. Let me just console log hi. And let me open the developer tools. You're going to see when I click on these things, I drew 3 circles, but now when I click on them, we get high and we're also drawing circles. So that's actually a disaster that we need to fix somehow. And basically by default, the elements in the DOM, they actually propagate or bubble at the top. So if you click on this, it's going to bubble literally to the top. It's going to say, okay, on click on this child, okay, on click on me, on the SVG, right? That's why this is happening. But we can actually easily fix that. We can say E stop propagation. Boom. That's easy. Alright, and for the fill, let's just say selected ID is equal to the circle ID. In this case, we're going to give this color, so it's grayish, otherwise it's going to be transparent. And then let's go back to the top, and here where we push the circle, we're actually going to say selected is equal circle, just so we have a circle selected. Alright, so now when we go back here, we can now start drawing circles. By default, it's going to be selected, right? And now we can actually left click on the circle. It's going to select the circle, but it's not going to draw any more circles unless we want to do that. So we can draw more circles if we want. Okay, so let's work on adjusting the radius or diameter of the circle. For that, we're going to use on context menu. We're going to get an event, and we actually want to prevent the default behavior. So we don't want to invoke the context menu when we click on a circle. Because, for example, right now, if I draw some circles, then right click on them, we're going to get the normal context menu. But if I save this and draw some circles, now when I right click on them, nothing is going to happen. So now we can add our own custom behavior. So the first thing we want to do, we want to change the status to editing, and then we want to change this circle to be the selected circle. And now we can go here where our buttons are, or anywhere where you want to be honest. We can just put an if block here. We can say, hey, if status is editing, then we're actually going to show the dialog. So I'm going to say adjust surface 2 space Y. And then I'm going to add a span, adjust diameter of circle at, and now we can give it the coordinates of the currently selected circle. So we can say, for example, selected CX, and we can just copy this over, and we can say CY. Alright, so now let's just set an input. This is going to be a range. We can bind the value of the radius. That's basically it. And since we have a reference to this circle right here, because this is all reactive, this is pointing to these circles here, all of that state is going to be updated. So let me actually show you. If we say, for example, inspect, if I pull up the developer tools, let me just draw a circle. We're going to see here we have this normal circle, radius 40, but now if I right click on it, we're going to get this adjustment, and then we can actually change it. So we're going to see our state updates live. Boom, easy. So now when we go here, we can see that the radius is 80, just because everything is linked together. And then, okay, how do we cancel this? So this is very easy. When we click on this, if we're in this editing mode, we're going to go back to drawing instead of just drawing these circles like here. So let me actually just remove this where we draw the circle. So here we're going to check, hey, if status editing, we're just going to change the state. let's say status is drawing, and we're going to return, so we're not going to do anything else. Alright, cool. So now if I draw something here, let me just change it, and then when I click outside of it, it's going to close the dialog. Alright, so with that out of the way, the last thing we have to implement is the undo and redo history. This is actually something very simple. So for example, I'm thinking we can create snapshots like this. So this is just going to be an array that's going to hold an array of circles. And what do I mean by that? Well, actually, if we think about this like a slide, we can actually keep the track of all the changes. We can use an index to know at which snapshot we're on, so we can use that to control the state. And that's very simple and not a problem today because everyone has a lot of memory. But of course, we can also limit the amount of these snapshots in memory so we don't run into problems. So actually we can do this like this, and let me just give this a type. So this is going to be an array of circles, but it's going to be a nested array, right? And we're actually going to have history. So we're going to make this reactive, and let's start with -1. Alright, then we're going to have a couple of functions just to keep it very simple. So we're going to have undo, redo, and we're also going to create a snapshot function. So the first thing we want to do, we want to actually increment the history. And then we're going to say snapshots, push, and then we want to push circles. So whenever we change them, add a circle, change the radius, or whatever, this is the only thing that we have to do. But actually, since we're using an array, this is a proxy, we want only the regular values. So we can actually use state snapshot, not related to our snapshots. This is a thing in Svelte where it just gives you the normal value from this proxy, right? So we can actually just say circles, and this is just going to push the normal values. Alright, so now where we have undo, we can actually just reassign circle to snapshot, and we can just decrement history. So that's going to be it. And actually it's snapshots. Also, we can take this, and this is just going to be the opposite for redo. We're just going to go back, that's it. Alright, so now here where we actually create a circle, so we push it, we mark it as selected, and then we can just take a snapshot. Boom, like a photographer. Look at me, mom, I'm a pro. And back at the top here where we have status drawing. So for example, if we right click outside of the diameter, I'm going to take that as a sign that the user is done editing that diameter, because I don't want to constantly update state as they're changing the number, otherwise it will grow large. But I'm thinking if they're clicking and changing the state, then we can take a snapshot of the change. So I can just say snapshot here. Of course, you can do this however you want. And back here in our context menu, we can also check, hey, if status, so if we click on another circle while we're in the editing state, we can actually say, okay, let's save the state of the previous change. So we can just say snapshot. And that should actually be it for the most part. All right, so now let me actually draw two circles. I'm going to draw a circle here and a circle here. Let me actually just change the radius. I'm going to click on it. And now we can actually see undo. Actually, we first need to wire up the buttons. I'm so silly. So we can actually go here. Where are buttons? How many times has this happened, right? You make something and it doesn't work, and then you forgot to add the event listener. Alright, let's do that. So now they're gone. Let's change this. Undo. It works really beautifully. But of course we can get into trouble since we can just do whatever we want with these buttons. So maybe we can actually somehow limit them using some logic, right? Okay, this, how beautiful is that? Alright, so let's actually, since we're here at the buttons, the last thing we have to do, so we're going to say, hey, this is disabled if history is just at the start, so we don't have anything. And then we're going to say for this one, hey, disable this if history is equal to snapshots length -1. Awesome, so now we can see we can't undo or redo. So now we're going to draw the circles. We can actually undo them. So now that we have a redo stack, we can actually redo them, and everything works beautifully. Alright friends, this was a fun one. I hope you learned a lot. Alright, your last mission, if you wish to accept it, is to create a spreadsheet app. And to be honest, this one was even challenging for me because I don't even use spreadsheet apps, right? So how do they even work? I kind of know the basics, the formulas there, whatever, but I'm like, okay, how is this interaction? How does this happen? So maybe if you feel the same way, just open Google Sheets or whatever and actually look how the thing works. And if you want to attempt this challenge yourself, go ahead. If you want some tips, just think of it as a two-dimensional array. So you have rows and columns, then you can update that state. And for example, this formula, something like this sum, can actually be part of your state. So once you loop over it, then you can parse it in the template. And then when you double click the cell, you're actually going to get a raw value in the input, right? Alright, so I hope that at least helps a bit if you're going to attempt it yourself, so good luck. Alright, let's solve this problem together. First I'm going to create a script tag. Let's define 10 rows and 10 columns. And of course this is all going to be dynamic. This isn't some hard-coded state where you're going to create the right values by hand. No, this can be any size you want. Well, actually that's a bit of a lie because I'm going to use the alphabet for the letters. We're only limited from A to Z, but honestly I would just keep adding things here, or I would actually turn this into an array so I can just add things by hand, because this is actually the easiest for me since I'm lazy, right? And then we're actually going to have our piece of state. So we're going to have data. So we're going to create actually a two-dimensional array, so rows and columns. So we're going to have an array. So each of these arrays inside of here is going to represent a row. And then we're going to inside have a value. So this is going to be item. And let me just copy this over. We're going to have item in this row. This is going to be the price, amount, and we're going to have total. So this is great because this also visually looks the same to the end result. Alright, so let me just copy over this row. And then inside of here, we're going to actually add our first item. Let's say a nice banana value. So let's say per kilo that is going to be €1 or whatever. And then we're going to have 4 kilos of banana. And here's what I was talking about. So we can just put our formula in here, which we can parse later. I'm just going to say multiply. Then it's going to be B2, C2. Awesome. So let's do this for the apple. So we're adding another row. And let's take this red one. Looks really nice. All right, let's say €2 and 2 kilos. And then, of course, this is going to be B3, C3. All right, and our last row, let's just put this as blank. This is going to be total. And instead of multiply, this is going to be sum. And the sum is going to be of D2, D3. We also need other two pieces of state. We need to know the selected cell, and then we have to know what cell we're currently editing. So let's say, let's selected cell, state, that's it, and this is going to be edited cell. Alright, let's take care of the markup and style. So here I'm going to create a table, and this is another Achilles heel of mine. I almost never use tables, and then I'm like, how does this work? And then when you get into styling tables, you enter a new dimension. But yeah, actually, it's really not that bad, to be honest. So we can just say table head. So now we're going to specify the head A, B, C, D, etc. So now we can declare this row. We can create an empty table heading. So this is what we want to do. We actually want this thing here. So we have our A, B, C, D columns, and then we have our rows here. But basically this is just the empty spot that we want. So this is what I'm doing here. And now we can actually loop over the rows. So you can say each array. So you can loop over it. So we're going to get 10 empty items inside of the array. There's nothing that we care about the value. And we just have this index. That's basically it. So now we're going to create a table heading. And now we can access the letter by passing the index. Cool. If I save this and I look at the result, you're going to see that it works. Alright, so we're going to create the body. So to create the body, first we're going to loop over the rows, then we're going to loop over the columns or the cells. So we're going to do the same trick. We're going to loop over the rows. There's nothing because we don't care about the value. Let's get the index. Alright, so we're going to have a table row. And now inside of this row is where all the magic is going to happen. Alright, so for the heading, so these are going to be our numbers. I actually don't want it to start with 0, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say I plus 1. There we go. Alright, so now we're going to loop over the columns. I'm going to say each array calls as nothing. And then let's actually get this I, but since we already have I, let's just say J. But you can of course name this whatever you want. And this is going to be calls. Alright, and we're almost done. Now we can actually use the table data. Alright, so let's give it the value. So we can just use the index of our rows and columns to access it. So we can say data at I, since it's a two-dimensional array, we can now access it by using J. And now when that is done, we can just access the value. But of course, let's also make sure that this value exists. And now to tidy this up, let's actually create a constant variable here. So we clean it up. So we can say const value equals whatever we created just now. And actually, my bad, this has to go here inside of this each block. Cool, so now we can make this a lot cleaner. We can just pass in the value here. And now let me actually show you, if we save this, we're going to actually get the value. Alright, so now let's also add the styles. So let's say table max width 800 pixels, table data, let's give it a fixed width 160 pixels, fixed height 40 pixels, so it looks more like cells, font weight semi-bold, text align left. Let's also add a selected class, so you can say ampersand selected, and let's give it an outline, and then let's also add this highlight color. And I'm going to add a border radius, var radius 1. Alright, so the last thing I want to style is the input inside the cell. So I can say height 100%, padding 0 pixels, and I want to set the background and outline to none. And now we don't really have an input here, but you can see this already looks a lot better. Alright, let's work on selecting the cell, and this is actually going to be very simple, but first we actually need some identifier, because for example we're looping over nothing here, so we actually need to give this some identifier. And for this I actually want to name all of those table data with their appropriate cell numbers, so A1, A2 and etc. And for this I'm actually going to create a new local constant here. I'm just going to name this cell, so we know what cell it is. And for this we need the column number, so we can say letters at J, and then we want the row number. So you can say I plus 1, since you don't want to start with 0, right? And then we can also use a data attribute, so we can say data cell, which is going to be really useful, just so you know what the cell is. And now when I go here, for example, and I inspect this banana, for example, you can actually see this is A2, B2, C2, and so on, so everything works. We can see the first row should be also right, so data cell A1, B1, C1, and etc. Alright, so this works as expected, so now we can actually label and identify the data cell. And then we can just create another piece of state here. We can say const, this is selected if the selected cell is equal the cell. And now we can also use this to apply a class. So we can say class selected, and we don't have to say selected because it has the same name. Awesome, now we can use an onClick event handler. Alright, so let's go here and we can say onClick, and let's just pass a function. So we can first check, hey, if this is selected, then just return. Otherwise, we're going to assign selected cell to the current cell, since we have all of these local states. And since we're here, when we do this, we also want to reset the cell that's being edited. So we can just say edited cell null. So we can save everything. So now we're going to see that if we click on a cell, it's going to get highlighted. Awesome. Okay, let's work on parsing the value. So I'm going to create a new value here, which is going to be the parsed value. So I'm going to name this parsed value. So this is how this is going to work. If the value exists, we're going to parse the value. Otherwise, we're going to return nothing. So let's replace this with parsed value. Alright, so let's create this function at the top. Function parse value. We're going to pass in a value, which is a string, and it's going to return a string or number. And let's just return the value. So I'm going to save, and we're going to see everything works the same as before. Alright, so the first thing we actually have to do is we have to parse the formula. We need to get back the operation, so sum, multiply, and we need to get back the cell somehow. So for that, I'm going to create a function parse formula. I'm going to accept a value, which is going to be a string. So let's do that. So for example, if we have multiply B2, C2, I'm going to actually split this by this first. So we're going to get this part, which I can further split, and then I can split the second part. You can actually solve this with one line of regex, but whatever. You can do that if you prefer regex, but I think this is going to be at least readable for you. So I'm going to do this. So we're going to get the result. We're going to get value, split. We're going to split it by this. And then we're going to get A and B. And now we can get the operation. Then we can split it by equals, and then we want the second value. Alright, so now we can also get the cells. We can say B replace. So we first need to get rid of this thing. We need to replace it with nothing, and then we can split it. Alright, so now we can actually return the operation and the cells. But we're really not done yet. Okay, so let me show you how this works. I'm going to take this and let me just open the developer tools. And we can just do this. Let me remove this type here. Awesome. Okay, so now we can parse a formula. So we can say console log parse formula. We can pass in a formula here. So we can say multiply B2C2. Awesome. So now let's see the result. All right, so now we get back the operation, which is multiply, and we get back the cells. But this really isn't useful to us, these cells, right? You actually have to know the index for our two-dimensional array. So we need to create a function that can turn the cell name to the index, which really isn't that bad. So we can actually go back here. Let's create a new function. So we can name this cell name to index. We can pass in a value, which is going to be a string. So basically we need this for this. So we have A1, and then we need to turn this into the index. So this is going to be 0, 0, which we can later use to access the value or whatever. So we can use it like this, right? And basically what I'm going to do, which you should probably also use regex for this, but actually let me just be lazy. So first I'm going to, let me just say result equals value dot split. And what I'm going to actually do, first I'm going to get the column, and then I'm going to spread the rows because we might have A10, A11, and etc. And I just want to catch all of those numbers. And this is why it's probably better to use a regex for this, but whatever. All right, so now we can actually return this. We can return the row, which is going to be plus row, since we want to turn this into a number, because we're going to use join. So we turn it into a number, and then you have to say -1. Because, for example, for A1, we're going to get 1, but that's really not the actual index. We have to go back 1, subtract it 1, because we actually incremented it in the template. Alright, and for the column, we actually just want to say letters, and we want to get letter at that index of the column, right? So we can say index of column. That's basically it. Alright, so now we actually have to use this. So now we can use a map to turn the cells to the index. We can just go here and say cells map, cell name to index. That's basically it. Alright, so now here where we parse the value, now we have all of the ingredients that we need. We can also return a value by default, right? But first we have to check the value. If value starts with equals, then we can do something, right? In this case, we want to parse this. Alright, and now look at this. We can say result equals parse formula. We just need to pass in the value. And now we can destructure what we got from it. So we can say operation and the cells. Okay, but this is a bit more complicated because, for example, let me just collapse this. For example, if you just use a formula here for these regular fields, that's fine. But what, for example, if we have this total here, we have this sum D2, D3, but we actually don't have the value of these fields, right? So what we actually have to do, we have to actually get the real value somehow of these fields, right? Alright, so to do that, we can actually go here and we can just loop over those cells and we can just recursively call the parse function. Alright, so this is what I'm going to do. Let me just say const values. We're going to map over the cells. Let's pass in a callback here. Here we can destructure row column. Alright, so let's get the value. We can say data row column dot value, and then we can check here, hey, if value starts with equals, then we're going to recursively call this function. Let's just return parse value. We're going to pass in the value. And let's also add a plus sign so we turn it into a number. Otherwise, if this is not a formula, we can say return plus value so it's a number. So that's basically it. And this is the last part where we're actually going to convert everything. So we're going to sum, multiply, and etc. For this, we can actually just use a simple reducer. Okay, so we can actually just say return values reduce. And this is going to be the total. So this is going to be the accumulator. And then we get access to the value. Alright, so we can actually just put them like this. And let's actually pass in a function body. And I'm going to do this. But for right now, we can just pass a starting value, which is going to be 0, 1. But for example, let's say that we run into a case where you have to multiply the value. This would always be 0, right? Alright, so we can actually just use an expression here. We can say, hey, if this operation is multiply, then we're going to set the initial value to 0, actually 1, or it's going to be 0. So that's going to be it. Alright, so now inside of here, we can just say, hey, if operation is sum, then we can return total plus value. That's it. A reducer is really simple. Otherwise, if this is multiply, we can just multiply the value. And let's see, what is this complaining about? Let's see, is not assignable to, so it's probably receiving a type it doesn't expect. Let me see. We don't have any case if this is something else. Okay, so we can actually just return total or whatever. So now this should be happy, and this might have seemed super complicated, but if you just think through it, it's actually very simple, and you can also make this a lot better if you just use regex, to be honest. But yeah, I think this is it. So now if we save this, it's going to format, but now when we go here, oh, can you look at this? This actually looks beautiful. Alright, so let's see how we can edit a cell. So we can go here, and instead of clicking when we select the cell, we actually want to double click to start editing. So we can say on double click, and now we can say edited cell is equal to the current cell. And here I'm just going to yoink this, so now we can use an if block, and now we can check, hey, if this is in editing mode, which we're going to add right here. So we're going to say, okay, this is in editing mode if the edited cell is equal to the current cell. That's basically it, just so it looks cleaner, right? Alright, so now we're going to add an input of type text. We're going to pass the value, and on input we're going to invoke the update function. And let's also autofocus this, so we don't have to use any JavaScript. We're going to get a warning because of accessibility. We can just ignore this, and that's basically it. Alright, so let's also add an else clause here. So we're going to add the parsed value, or show it, that is, right? Because if you're not editing, then show the value. Alright, so let's add this function. Let's add it right here. Function update. Alright, let me actually save this. So let's actually see. So now if I double click this on this cell, we're actually going to get the formula. Look at this. How beautiful is this, friends? Alright, so now let's actually work on updating it. Alright, so we need actually two things. I want to get the value from the input, and I want to select the parent element so we can select the cell that we're on. So we can actually do something like this. Let's just say result eTarget as HTML input element. And now we can just destructure the values that we need. So we're going to get the value from the input, and I also want to select the cell. So this is going to be the parent element. And of course, I forgot to pass in an event here. This is just going to be an event. Alright, so on the parent element, like this, we can actually access this dataset cell. This is why I put this on the table data, just so it's useful for later. But you can also use this for styling or whatever else you want. And also, if you remembered, we created this cell name to index function, so we can get the index inside of our array. So this is basically what we're going to use this for. And let me actually just take this. So we can say const result. We can say cell name to index. We can pass it here. It's going to complain because this might be possibly undefined. So I'm going to say, okay, this exists, don't bother me. And let's put this right here. Alright, so let's just destructure the values that we need from it. So we're going to get row and column. And then here, we can just add this new value, add a row or whatever else we need. Alright, so I'm going to say if the row exists. So I can say data row. In this case, we're going to do something. Otherwise, we're going to create a new row. So we're going to do it like this. Data row equals empty array. And we're actually going to add the value that we edited. So you can say data row column is going to be equal to the new value, right? And inside of here, if the row exists, we actually have to check if the column exists, and if the column doesn't exist, we're going to create a cell. And what do I mean by that? Well, we're just checking data row column. So I think I misspoke, right? But actually mean that we're checking if the cell exists. So we're going to do something here. So we just need to update the current cell. So we say data row column value, and we can set it to the value. Otherwise, we're going to create the cell, data row column, and we're just going to assign it. Awesome, and I think that's basically it, right? So for example, if we save this, let's go back here. So let's change the amount of bananas to 2, and now we're going to see everything is going to reactively update. We can change the amount of apples, and everything works. We actually did it and built all the 7 GUIs. So we went through the counter, temperature converter, flight booker, timer, CRUD, circle drawer, and cells. And of course, if you like what you've seen, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.